welcome to Crime Bytes, the show where we talk about some truly bizarre and disturbing crime cases. My name is Eliza, and today is True Crime Tuesday. So I'm out in the woods just outside of Albany, New York, and this place is called The Crossings. I think it's technically in Loudonville. But yeah, I lived about 15 minutes from here when I lived in Albany, and it's like the most peaceful spot that I could find. Needless to say, I've found myself here for the day instead of at my home, so here we are. But that being said, wouldn't it be maybe cool to do like stories of things that go down in the woods? Like give it that extra something? I don't know. Let me know what you think. But we're here today, and I've just got this shirt too. Don't worry about a thing. Every little thing is gonna be all right. Can't quite see that part, but that's the vibe I'm trying for. And today's case has a lot of twists and turns, and it does bring us out in the woods at one point. But let me start you with a question. What are your thoughts on someone giving anti-bullying talks in high schools after being let out of prison for murdering someone that they bullied? I'm kind of split on how I feel about that. I think it could go in a variety of ways. It could go down either way. But in today's case, this particular instance, it feels very wrong. But let me know what you think. Or have you ever heard that expression, with friends like these, who needs enemies? That's going to be the tone of today's case. But before we get into it, let's pause for a quick promotion. I'll be quick because I keep talking about snow, but if you want your teeth to be something enviable, snow's got you covered. You could be on your way to a smile that's like shades whiter in just a week. Click the link in my description to start shopping and receive 15% off your first purchase, and then start smiling however you want, whenever you want. And with that, let's get into today's case. And today we are visiting sunny California in the early 70s. Today is really going to paint sort of a cautionary tale as to how envy can get into our lives and just have disastrous, straight up unthinkable consequences. So let's start by meeting Karen. Karen was described as a bit of a louder person, very pushy person, if you will. She was growing up in Arleta, California. She actually had just moved there when she was 8, and another girl would wander into her yard looking for her lost cat, and the two would strike up a conversation, and from there they would become fast friends. Missy was a lot smaller than Karen and way more mild-mannered, and they would joke that Karen kind of became like her bodyguard, and that was sort of their dynamic while they were kids. There was kind of a third wheel who lived on the street as well, named Laura Doyle, and we'll come back to her in a little bit, but she came from more of a broken home when compared to Missy and Karen, so they would hang out mostly at Missy's or Karen's. As the girls grew, Missy kind of blossomed into a really popular young lady, and Karen came along with her, but kind of resented the attention that she would get from just being herself, especially from the boys their age. So Karen would compensate for this in other ways and ended up finding herself pregnant at 14. And she would keep this baby. She would drop out of school, but she would still attempt to stay close with Missy, and also grew closer with Laura. At the same time, she was adjusting to life as a single mother at 14 and watching her friends grow up and have a more normal high school experience. So naturally, she and Missy did grow a bit apart, but Missy was kind of letting her own grades slip and experimenting a little bit with alcohol and being social, and so both girls ended up finding themselves in the same continuing education school. And Karen would find herself back in Missy's good graces when rumors started flying that Missy was sleeping around with people's boyfriends. So much so that she got jumped in the park so badly that her mother was pressing charges against the main girl who jumped her. But in the meantime, she had Karen and Laura, except that Karen and Laura both went in to date Missy's exes, and that really muddied the dynamic between the three friends. So let's start with Laura. Laura dated an ex of Missy's named Vic, and Vic ended up breaking up with her because of how jealous she was of Missy. Like, she was obsessed with him wanting Missy back, which he may have, but she didn't like it. And it was no better with Karen, because right around this time, Karen would start dating another one of Missy's exes, Randy. And just like with Laura, she would be all obsessed that Randy wanted Missy back, only he really did. And so, best not to pick at your friend's leftovers, I guess, but to try and be fair, it did sound like Missy was dating around, but either way, Karen actually did end up walking in on Randy trying to pull Missy onto his lap, and she was furious at Missy, who actually told him, "No, you're dating my friend." And on top of this, Karen would become pregnant with his baby again, but this time she would abort it essentially to spite him. She didn't want to have a child with him. So at one point, Karen attacked Missy in the park and threatened to cut her with a beer bottle over this dynamic. And not only that, after Vic and Laura did break up, he was hanging out with Missy, and the two were kind of joking around, and one thing led to another, and they ended up kissing. But guess who was watching from outside like a creepy horror movie, like peeping Laura. It was Laura, peeping Laura, and she ran up and tried to fight both of them. And at least Vic was there, because again, she was a lot larger, or she was bigger than Missy. And before Vic finally got Laura to leave, she screamed, "I'm going to kill that bitch." So although Missy didn't want these guys, her friends did, and the guys still wanted Missy, and it was a big frickin' mess. So around this time, when all this was going on, yet another wave of rumors hits the high school, and Missy's sleeping around again. And this time it was with her best friend's boyfriends. Her best friends who were already worried that their boyfriends wanted her. It's like their worst fear. But they had all known each other since they were kids, so they did all try and patch things up. And on that day, Missy would cancel her plans with her current boyfriend to hang out with her friends, hoping that this latest just disaster of a rumor could be mitigated. It was October 1st of 1985. Laura would drive up and pick up Missy like she had many times in the past, but at 6 p.m. when Missy was supposed to return or check in with her mother, Laura would call Missy's house to ask for Missy, checking to see if she had made it home. But she hadn't, and now Irene, Missy's mother, was a little bit concerned, but not really too worried yet, because Missy was known to miss her curfews. And Laura would tell her that after she picked Missy up, they drove around for a little, chatting, and she noticed that she needed to get gas, but then Missy saw a blue Camaro with two guys that she knew, and she decided to hop out and say hi while Laura went to go fill up her tank. And when Laura got back, Missy was gone. So she waited for a little bit, but figured Missy was just blowing her off for the guys in the Camaro, and she ended up taking off, and that's why she ended up calling Missy's mother to just check in and see if she got home safely. But again, she had not. So Irene would say that she waited up all night with the door unlocked, she was worried at this point, and all she could do was just hope that her daughter would come walking through that door, but that didn't happen either. So the next day, after waiting until 3 p.m., Irene just could not wait for Missy to come home any longer. She's waited almost 24 hours, so she goes to the police and she reports her daughter missing. And at first, of course, it's a 17-year-old girl, no real issues, popular, they think she's run away. But Irene is insistent, she knows Missy, and so they start looking for her, and on top of that, Irene starts looking for her on her own with Karen, who is also just devastated by her disappearance. But unfortunately, just 3 days later, on October 4th of 1985, two men hiking in Colby Canyon would find the body of 17-year-old Missy, literally still in the creek, held in place by a log that was on top of her head, forcing it under the water. So all hope of finding Missy alive was gone, and now they needed to find out who did this to her and why. Karen and Laura, her closest friends, were obviously very envious of her throughout their time being friends, but both of them swore that they had recently made up with her. And Laura was obviously the last one to see Missy, so she was focused on way more than Karen, and they would be looking for the blue Camaro and the two young men that Missy had left with, but they would never find them. Karen would actually move in with Missy's family with her 3-year-old to stay close to them, and she even made one of those pictures with the red tape to try and figure out what they were all missing. She thought at one point that it could be Randy because there were these trees with their names carved on them and his name was crossed out all funny, something funny. And she even somehow got Vic, Laura's ex, to jump him, and so badly it ended up putting him in the hospital. But beyond whatever was on those trees, there was literally nothing actually suggesting that Randy was even remotely involved. So it looked like Karen was still working through whatever she was working through with that, on top of losing Missy. Then 2 years later, that's right, this case would stay completely cold for 2 years, when Laura would admit that she was lying about what happened to Missy. She would say that after she picked Missy up, they drove down to a local church to pick up some drugs, and when they got there, she realized that she was on empty, and so she dropped Missy to make the deal and went to fill up her tank, but when she went back up to get Missy, everyone was gone. Similar story, but obviously still very different, and no one was happy. Most importantly, the whole investigation had been centered on Laura's original account, which was made up and had just completely changed, and there was literally not much at all they could do with this new story either, because, as I'm sure you're probably guessing already, Laura was lying this time as well. So the case would go cold again for a whole nother year, until another girl would come forward to the police with quite the confession, and the girl's name was Eva Chirumbold. Her brother had recently committed suicide, and she was really feeling the loss and working through some stuff related to that, and she also needed to get a few other things off her chest, and she knew what happened to Missy. So on October 1st, Laura would pick up Missy and they would head to the park together, but driving along behind them was another car, and Eva was riding in that car with Karen Severson. So they would pull up alongside Laura and Missy. Karen would say, "Let's go mess with them," and she would pull up fast and start screaming insults at Laura. And Laura would just be like, "What the fuck?" hurling them back at Karen, and it would get really heated between the two girls, and finally Laura was like, I'm not doing this, and she's out of there, and she would peel off, but Karen wasn't finished. Big loud Karen. So she would peel off behind her and just chase Laura, and Eva would say that for about 45 minutes these two girls were all over the road in this extreme car chase, just hurling insults at each other out the window, driving erratically. She was terrified, and she said she could see Missy in Laura's car with her arm on the window. She was scared, and they both were. And Laura and Karen were just both in a blind rage, and finally they would get to this secluded area out by Colby Canyon, and the two girls would just leap out of the car and start screaming at each other. And Missy and Eva at first were just in the passenger seats of each of the cars like, what the hell? And Missy decides she's going to try and intervene, and as soon as she opens her door to do so, the two girls just stop fighting and turn on her like some sort of horror show. And Karen would come right up and get in her face, and she would say, "Yeah, we're pissed, but not at each other. We're pissed at you." And Missy would just, her face would sink because she thought she was making up with her two best friends. She just witnessed this insane, crazy chase, and Sarah and Laura, who were both so much larger than her, Laura wasn't a big girl per se, but she was 5'6" and 135 to Missy's 5'4", 95, and Karen was only 5'2", but she was around 200 pounds, so she was like literally twice her size. So they were pushing Missy into the woods, and at first Eva stayed in the car, but then she reports trailing behind and watching them force Missy further and further into the woods until finally they would let her sit down on a rock, and she was just crying and asking them why they were doing this to her. They would just tell her that she slept with their boyfriends and she had ruined too many relationships and they had had enough. Laura would punch her, Karen would follow, and after they had gotten a few blows in, Laura would reach into her pocket and pull out a knife, and they would grab Missy by the head and just start hacking away at her hair. And she had just this long, beautiful hair that she was so proud of. And so she's still just crying and begging them to stop, and they're hacking and pulling it out in clumps. And at one point, she looks at Eva and she says, "The worst you guys can do is leave me out here." And she was so wrong, because after they hacked off all of her beautiful hair, they would tie her and gag her, and then Laura would walk down to this little creek that was down an embankment. She walked down to the water, which maybe was about 6 to 8 inches deep, and she ran her hands up and down looking at Missy and said, "The water's so nice, why don't you join me?" And Missy was horrified. She got what was happening. She's shaking her head no, and Karen just pushes her down the hill and just barrels on down behind her, and they drag her into the creek, and her hands are tied behind her back. At this point, Eva ran back to the cars. She wanted to get away from what she was seeing, but they were both locked. So she just kind of sat between them. And then she decided to go back, but she stopped when she heard a blood-curdling scream. And that scream was Missy lifting her head up to try and get out of Karen's grip from under the water, screaming for her life. Because after Karen and Laura had tied her, they started submerging her head underwater until they tired her out and walked to the edge of the creek and grabbed a log that weighed about 100 pounds and lifted it together and dropped it right on Missy's head, permanently submerging it. And they would walk out of the forest laughing. They were laughing, soaking wet and laughing, and then straight up told Eva that they killed Missy and she better keep her mouth shut. So she did, until the guilt ate away at her and her brother ended his life, and just that pushed her over the edge, and she told what she knew. Eva would have to say in a later interview,
"I wish that I had the courage and the strength to say, hey, this is enough, and to see what they were doing and stop it. I don't know why I didn't. I know I was only 17, but if I could change it, I think I would do it now."
So Laura and Karen were promptly arrested. Laura and Karen were both brought in at the same time after Eva confessed, and when they brought them in, they brought them into separate rooms after they could see that the other was there. Then they sat them at tables in those separate rooms, and they let a bunch of time pass, and each interview would make it seem like they took all that time because they were talking to the other girl, like over an hour. So they would think that the other had cracked and had been talking for a while, and it worked. They would say that the other confessed as well and had blamed the opposite. So they told Karen that Laura said Karen was the one that actually murdered her, so she would flip it right back. Karen would claim that she left Missy alone with Laura after helping her lift the log, knowing Laura was going to kill her, but it was a 100-pound log that was dropped on Missy, so no way. There wasn't any way one of them could have just. So nice try, Karen. And Laura would be told Karen flipped on her and said she did everything, which she actually did end up doing. But Laura didn't crack until the end, but she did crack, and she said that she took part in it because Karen had forced her to, because Missy needed to learn a lesson. And she claimed Karen started pushing her face under and taking things up to that last notch, but that ultimately it was both of them that had dropped the log on her head and that had killed her. They both were arrested that day, and Irene was told and she was just beyond devastated. These girls mourned her daughter with her. Karen even joked about being her surrogate daughter when she was moved in with her right after it happened. Can you even imagine? And another just sick kicker to this case is that Karen and Laura started both of those rounds of rumors about Missy sleeping around because they were jealous of her. Then they either began to believe them or they used them as an excuse to finish her off. Just disgusting and sick behavior. I don't even know with this one. Karen would be held without bail, and Laura would receive $1 million bail that she wouldn't be able to pay. And in March of 1990, both girls would be convicted of second-degree murder after being tried as minors. The jury was not convinced that the girls actually planned to kill Missy, as they denied it. Even if the attack was very clearly pre-planned, the murder may not have been. And they would receive 15 years to life in prison after Irene would beg for longer. And Karen would end up serving 21 and a half years, be released on December 9th of 2012. Laura would serve 22 years and be released in December of 2012. Eva would testify in the trials but would not be charged with anything herself. And just like we've seen this whole time, Laura and Karen responded very differently to their freedom. Laura essentially disappeared and attempted to move on with her life. Karen came out talking, and is anyone really surprised by that? She had more children, and she wrote a couple of books about the murder that she committed. And so Irene sued her ass and won, and that's going to be today's positive highlight because we have not done one of those in a while. Irene won, and all of the proceeds from Karen's second book were diverted straight to her. And Karen was touring the country giving anti-bullying talks, which, I'm sorry, really? She appeared on Dr. Phil as well. So here's
as you
a
look
quick
back
clip from
on
that.
this, how were you so morally corrupt that this was okay with you at the time? That this was something that you didn't say, you know what? No way. What the hell are you doing tying her hands behind her back? I'm out of here. I want no part of this.
You're right.
What was wrong with you that you were that broken that you didn't do that?
There's a list. You want a list? No.
I just want an answer.
You know, the truth, how could I get to that point? I was full of anger, hatred, bitterness, resentment. I had an identity crisis growing up. There are a lot of contributing factors in my life that contributed to this. Was it Missy? No. There was more to my life. And here's the thing. When it came time for this to happen, and we were up there. Now here's the thing, we were mean girls, we were bullies, and bullies are pack animals. When one started, we fueled the fire to the next. Individually, we wouldn't do this on our own, I don't believe, either one of us.
But you were the bodyguard, you were the one that fought the fights.
I fought a lot of fights, I did, and I was tired of it. I was tired of it.
So how are you drawn along by these other girls? You were the alpha dog in this. How are you drawn?
So anyhow, she was profiting from the murder she committed on top of everything else. And Irene was just like, are you fucking serious? Karen would go as far to defend herself, saying that Missy was her friend and she lost her too. Which, I'm sorry, what? The levels of delusion are, they're too much to unpack with this one, but in 2015, Missy's law was passed, and it prohibits people from profiting off of crimes that they commit, just like Karen was doing, and Irene was compensated. Unfortunately, she would pass away just 5 years later in 2020, but this law has been established. So that is going to do it for this one. What do you guys think? My heart hurts so much for Missy and Irene, just the levels of evil that Karen and Laura had inside of them that ultimately just festered and blew up at Missy. And she just wanted friends. These girls were anything but. Just pure evil because they couldn't be what she was. And Missy was just so sweet and she didn't see it. She canceled her plans to go make amends with these bullies, and essentially it ended up being fatal for her. All right, guys, our last sin for the summer is gluttony, and I've got a good one for you. If you want to check out last year's envy case, we talked about if I can't have you, nobody can, lady. Check that out in the end card if you're in the mood for another. And until next time, please stay safe out there. Bye.